Andy Austin here with another video on using IEMT for bad dreams and nightmares. Before I get into what I do in order to use IEMT for dreams, I want to go through some of the principles that might be useful to you. On the webpage here, I'm going to put some additional details. If I can find it, and I'm fairly sure I can, I'm going to also put up the old audio recording of the workshop I did some years ago on working with sleep problems and different sleep patterns. It's worth mentioning some key sleep issues. Now, there tends to be four very common, there's others, but four common ways that people don't sleep, and they take the following format. There's the difficulty falling asleep. So once you eventually do get to sleep, you sleep fine, but you go to bed and you lie awake for hours and hours and hours. There's a number of reasons why that might be. It might be simply because your body clock is not in sync with your sleep-wake requirement. What I used to find when I worked shifts at the hospital, I've never been an evening person, but I'm somebody who's typically awake very early. So I'll typically wake up at 5:30 in the morning, and I'll be up almost straight away after that. Usually around about 7 o'clock in the evening, I'm ready to, my brain shuts down. I'm normally in bed by about 8:30. Now that's quite normal for me. All well and good, I'm self-employed, but there was a time when I had to work for other people and I had shift requirements placed upon me. So for me, the late shift was just a nightmare because by 6 o'clock I'm done. But no, I've got to be there until 9:30 at night. What I used to do was simply swap, because I found that most people didn't like the early shift because they don't like getting up for 6 o'clock to be at work for 7, whereas that works fine for me. So I would try and swap shifts as often as possible. But when it's not that and people can't fall asleep, they lie awake seemingly for hours, that's usually because there's an adrenaline type thing going on. So either there's excitement or anxiety or stress. And so essentially there are quality of life issues that need to be addressed by that individual. No amount of meditating and medication and all the rest of it is going to help. They need to actually fix the reason why their brain is still running active at that time of night. I'm well aware for some people what they need to do is change the job. They need to change the lifestyle that their employment is forcing them into. I recognize for myself my general well-being, my mental health, my emotional health, and basically every aspect of me massively improved when I gave up shift work. Because I'd done shift work all of my adult life until that point, I hadn't known any different. All of the jobs I'd ever had involved shifts. When I stopped doing that and I had a regular sleep-wake cycle, it was incredible the effect that had upon me. A lot of people, that's too difficult because of the requirements of employment, but it's something they may want to consider. What's the better alternative? Continue with that job, or have a better quality of life, but with different money, less money, or whatever. Now, another one, I used to experience this periodically at the hospital, is difficulty staying asleep. So head hits the pillow, fall asleep straight away, 20 minutes awake again, fall asleep, wake up, fall asleep, wake up, all the way through the night. And it can get quite frustrating, and sometimes I would find that that would match with having dreams where I'm at work. And I would be dreaming throughout the night, yet I would also feel like I've been awake all night. So that difficulty staying asleep, that is a typical and classic stress response. This is bad stress. This is things not going very well for the individual. So if you have a person who is having difficulty staying asleep and regularly waking throughout the night, then there are some issues they need to address. Now, this might not be work related. This might be relationship related. So if they're in a long-term relationship with another person and things aren't going so well, that might be something to look at there. It's amazing how many people can factor insomnia as the causative agent of what's wrong with their lives, because that's a safe thing to blame it on. Well, I can't sleep, so I'm tired all the time, I'm really irritable. Yeah, possibly, or maybe that's the result of some other issues that you're currently brilliantly denying at the moment. Now, the other one is middle night waking. So this typically is 2 to 4 hours after you first go to sleep. So if I go to bed, say at 9 o'clock, I'm waking up, say midnight to 1 o'clock-ish. Now, middle night waking is quite common with small children. It's most commonly associated with a physiological problem. So there is a health issue, a physical health issue, not a psychological health issue. So if you have small children who are waking in the middle of the night, especially if they've got night terrors and things going on, you might want to have a little look at gastrointestinal issues. Is there a dietary issue going on? Are they producing too much gas? So that's, if you look at FODMAP, the thing that's associated with IBS, FODMAP diet, do they need antibiotics, probiotic support? Is there something else going on physiologically with that child if this becomes a long-term issue? We all get gastrointestinal upsets periodically because we've eaten something. It's when it's a long-term thing that you've got to get concerned. If you've got middle night waking and there's no obvious symptoms of anything, but you're generally feeling run down and bad in the daytime, you need to go and get yourself checked by a doctor. So that's a really good indicator there is an underlying physiological problem. And then the other one, which often can be mistaken for this, they get interchanged with each other, is early morning waking. So this will be normally 2 to 3 hours prior to the normal waking up time. And what's interesting here is the precision of the body clock. So they're waking up at, say, 3:37 precisely every night. There is a precise time that they tend to wake up, or as near as. And sometimes people start to take on this mystical notion that that time must mean something, like it does in the movies kind of thing, or the numbers mean something. There's something important about it. There is. They're probably depressed, but haven't caught up with the fact that they're depressed yet. This early morning waking is an indication of physiological changes happening within the neurology that is synonymous with depression. So high cortisol levels going on, changes in the brain chemistry going on, and so on. So that's something that may need to be addressed quite quickly. They may not have any other obvious symptoms at that moment in time. They may not have caught up yet physiologically, but it suggests there are depression issues that are emerging or have already emerged. So that's early morning waking. So now within that, one of the things I will consider when working with somebody who reports nightmares as a therapy issue. Now, people have nightmares all the time. Not many people have nightmares to a sufficient level that they then go and report for therapy. And so obviously I'm not going to see a large number of people with nightmare issues, but one of the considerations I will have if I do see one of these people, when are they waking up with the nightmare? Is the nightmare waking them up in the early hours? So it's early morning waking, because the mechanism of waking, whether it's like I just feel strange and I wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning, I wake up bright and alert at slightly anxious at 3:37 a.m. early morning waking, that may actually be triggered by a nightmare or a bad dream. They may have a residual dream that they're waking out of that they then remember. So the timing of when the nightmare occurs it may not be, but it might be significant. Are they regularly waking up they're going to bed at 9 o'clock and they're regularly waking up at midnight with a nightmare? Okay, so that's middle night waking, albeit the nightmare is the reported issue. Have they got a physiological thing going on? And that's something I would want to have investigated, or certainly have a discussion about. If they've got nightmares waking up in the early hours, early morning waking, in which case they've got depression issues. If they're falling asleep and 10 minutes later they're waking up with a nightmare, okay, there's stress issues going on, and so on. So again, good indicator. The timing of the nightmare is something also to consider. Now, there's something else that is important to consider, and this is the observation that has been around for a long, long time. People with clinical depression, so I'm not talking they've got a mood disorder, they're unhappy, they say, oh, I'm feeling a bit depressed today. I'm talking about people with physiological depression symptoms. They've got cognitive retardation, they've got hyperarousal of the nervous system, they've got sensitive to loud noises, they've got early morning waking, their memory is going, they probably think they've got a brain tumor, because they usually do. They start to have all sorts of anxious and morbid ruminations, and so on. So they've got lots of the physiological stuff happening that's associated with clinical signs of depression, beyond that of mood. One of the observations is that if you deprive these people of sleep, so keep them awake for 24 hours, those physiological symptoms typically disappear, and their biometric stuff that you can measure normalizes. Okay, they're knackered because they're horribly tired, but their biometric markers improve. Now, that's been recognized for probably about 200 years, and it's always been a bit of a mystery as to why that works. And there was a time when sleep deprivation that's induced was used to treat serious problems of depression in institutions. What we know is that depressed people have depressed dreams. They may or may not remember the dreams that they're having, but they are depressed by their dreams. And this is written up by Ivan Tyrrell and Joseph Griffin in their book, Human Givens. I'm going to highly recommend you get a copy of this book. Years back, I did some training with Joseph Griffin. This is when I was in the mid-90s. Very, very knowledgeable guy. I don't know Ivan, but they certainly write from a very, very interesting perspective. So Ivan Tyrrell, Joseph Griffin, The Human Givens, well worth looking at. So one of the things they recognize is that you can alleviate depression in a single session. Now, you may not cure it, but you can alleviate those physiological symptoms very, very fast. And the way that this can be done is by basically teaching the person to go into the alpha wave brain state. So essentially, they're going into that light, daydreamy sleep like you'd get on a bus or a train, when you can just nod off and you've got the flickering light and the repetition of the sounds. And you can snap back to consciousness at any moment. You don't miss your stop, but you're in that kind of beatific, dreamy-like state. By teaching a depressed person to be able to enter that state, it alleviates the physiological symptoms of depression. And I have observed this both for myself and in clients as well. So I know how powerful this can be. The challenge is getting the person to do it. Because one of the problems about depression is that it depletes the person's motivation to do something about it so often. So that can be a challenge in itself. I have a little suspicion that people are not spending that much time entering into daydream alpha wave state. We discourage children from doing it. When they zone out in classrooms at school, they can often get told off. They can often get medicated for daring to zone out for a moment. Oh my God, he can't pay attention for more than 20 minutes at a time, because we know nothing about the circadian and ultradian rhythms of the body cycles. No, he can't pay attention, so we must medicate. We also give mass distraction and mass medication via electronic devices. So a lot of people now are never in a position where they're bored, because we have solved the problem of boredom through technology. And I find it ironic that not only have we solved the problem of boredom, we have put these devices out there for incredibly low value, give them to all the children, and then culturally we complain when we see children always playing on these devices. Bizarre. It's not like the kids invented these things themselves. They've been provided with these things. We've also taken away their opportunity to be bored. Now, boredom produces creativity. Boredom also creates daydreaming and fantasy. And we have largely eliminated that now. Instead of learning to generate our own internal imagery, we are now dependent on devices to supply it for us. To go off at a tangent at the moment, there's been some interesting studies around people's use of pornography. There was a time when, in order to be aroused solo, people would have to internally generate the imagery themselves. Now they don't need to. They can just go straight to a device and the imagery is supplied for them. Now we have to look at, if we're doing that to all these people's brains 24/7 across the whole world, what is this doing to people's brain activity? What is this doing to their natural brain cycles? And we're seeing constant reports of this explosion of depression in the young people, anxiety in young people, poor social skills and all the rest of it. And possibly it's because they never have the opportunity to just be bored, to trigger that creative process in the brain, where we start to generate our own images and our own stories and our own fantasies. I was interested a year or two ago. The BBC did a program on investigation onto how China deals with mobile phone addiction, and it was a fantastic documentary, and I was quite impressed with what I was seeing. Essentially, these kids are rounded up and locked into this institution. One of the exercises they do for every day is they stand in a group and they stare at the wall for 1 hour. Staring at the wall exercise, 1 hour a day. And the reason is they're trying to train these kids to actually be able to switch off the dependency and to control self whilst generating internal imagery and state for themselves. And they also sent them off on some extraordinary adventures, like they'd have to hike across the city for 2 days, sleeping in a bus overnight and so forth. They allow them to have a struggle. They allow them to go into environments where they're slightly lacking stuff. They have to group together, they have to huddle together in the bus to keep warm at night and try and find comfort. And of course, this is the stuff of adventures for children. We don't give them this opportunity anymore. We don't even give them the opportunity to be bored anymore. The car journey is now filled with a DVD on the back seat. The car journey is filled with whatever game that they're playing on their phone. There is no longer a car journey where you just sit looking out the window daydreaming. I'm not sure this is a good thing at all. So, if I'm working with a depressed person, a person who is having nightmares, I'm considering the following. They're making those pictures themselves. A nightmare is something I am thinking. It is a set of images and a story that I have generated. And why am I not in control of that if I'm the one thinking it? Oh, but I'm asleep. It's not my fault. I can't help it. Well, take some responsibility. So there's lots of things, and it will be in the audio recordings of the sleep workshop, that I encourage people to do around taking some responsibility for their own thinking and taking some responsibility for their sleeping. What else have I got on my notes here? Oh, one other thing. For a number of, over really a 25-year period, on and off, not constantly, I've kept dream diaries. I haven't done this for a long time now, but typically it was when I was backpacking around India. I'd be out there for 6 months or a year, so I had all this free time. Now, what I would do is I would keep a dream diary, and every morning I would instantly, as soon as I wake up, write down keywords of all the dreams I can remember, and then in the evening before bed I would write the dreams out in the diary. In the early stages that's really difficult to do, hence why write the keywords to begin with, and then later on in the day you use the keywords to prompt your memory for the recall of the dream. By repetition of that, recalling the dreams become very, very easy, and so exploring the dreams psychologically, mentally, becomes quite an easy thing to do as you write them down. Here is the thing that I found. After about 6 weeks of keeping a daily dream diary, the first week, not so easy. The second week, it becomes a lot easier. Third and fourth week onwards, it's really, really simple process. So don't expect it to be easy to begin with. But typically after about 6 weeks, I would start lucid dreaming. So this would be where now I would be aware that I was in a dream and I could operate from inside that dream. So I was conscious within the dreams. Not every single time, but very often. And that led into all sorts of interesting experiences. The reason I haven't maintained it is because it didn't benefit me in any way. I couldn't find anything that it was improving my life. What it was giving me a discipline of self-investigation, but there was nothing life-changing that would happen for me. Here's the other observation. I can look at a dream diary from 20 years ago, and I've still got them all somewhere in the attic here, and I could open up any random page, and if it was 20 years ago, random page in that diary, and I would look at the description of the dream. I will remember every single dream, and that really catches my attention because all the data is still there mentally. I just don't have the recall of it without the prompt. Now, there's a bit of debate here, and a colleague of mine, Mike, points this out, which is, are we supposed to remember dreams? Because generally dreams we become amnesic for very quickly after waking, and there's some that stick with us until whatever point has been made is made. So possibly keeping the dream diary and lucid dreaming isn't necessarily going to be beneficial. And I think it raises a good point. I don't know. What I do know, nothing negative came from it for me, but I can't say anything positive came from it either, really, apart from some interesting observations. Right, so in working with dreams, one of the things you want to look at is teach the person how to go into an alpha state. There's various devices you can buy. There's the light and sound machines. They pulse light and pulse sound via a headset and goggles. They're little devices and they range from $40 up to $2,000–$3,000. Now, some of you will be aware or even remember, I used to be the UK importer and retailer of these devices back, well, quite a lot of years ago now. And so I had essentially every single one of those devices, and various manufacturers would send them to me and various retailers would ask me to market them as well. There was a point that these things were incredibly popular, and it leaked into the NLP world for a while as well, and there was various ones that were very popular with the NLPers. Here was my observation about the light and sound machines. They are brilliant, but most people buy them and use them for about a week and then they stick them in the drawer of junk, never to be used again. I sold a lot of those quite a few years ago, and I bet every single person I've sold them to no longer uses them. Here's the thing, if you're tempted to buy one of these, I've got to be honest with you, there is no benefit from buying the really expensive ones. And I used to say this as a retailer as well, is that I had some of the really expensive ones in here, but I've got to be honest, the $40 ones are just as good, if not better. They all do the same thing. They're a pace and lead device, and they can pace and lead you into different states, allegedly. I think they do, but I don't think they can pace and lead you into all of the states they're claimed for. Like, we can raise your ability to learn by going into the learning state. No, it will help you go into alpha. I think that's pretty much all I could get out of these things. We did some studies, or not some studies, that's probably an exaggeration. We did some experiments with EEG machines at the time as well. So put someone in an EEG machine that's connected up to the Mac, run the light and sound machine, what happens? They go to alpha. It's simple as that. I didn't really see much else going on. So these things are very, very useful. They're great relaxation devices. They're generally pretty safe. The programmable ones, the expensive programmable ones where you can design your own sessions, no one ever does that, by the way. They generally will stop you putting in the frequencies that will cause you to have a seizure. The cheaper ones who you can program, they generally don't do that. You don't need to program your own. They're just not necessary. But these can be useful devices to play with and explore. And you're looking really about 20 minutes a day. Imagine that journey in the middle of the day on the train after some uptime where you've been concentrating on things for quite a while, and you just nod off for really just 2 or 3 minutes. That's all. But you're not even asleep. You just kind of do that reset. That's the thing you're looking for. And it's very easy to learn to go into that. There's various meditation techniques as well that you could learn to do that. So that's quite a useful thing to be able to do. The other device, which is not a pace and lead, it's an induction device, is the AlphaStim. I've sent it to a colleague actually, he's having a look at it. It's a device you connect to your ears and it basically passes a microcurrent frequency across the brain. There's various devices available. AlphaStim is by far the most expensive, way overpriced. I used to retail these as well. They're way overpriced now. They've tripled in price to when I was selling them. They're exactly the same device. Look on eBay, get a second-hand one. They are superb. I can't pretend otherwise. They work extremely well for calming the brain. They work extremely well for anxiety states and can be helpful for anxiety depressives. Don't overpay on these things. Look on eBay for second-hand devices. If you're in the States, they're prescription only. There will be places that have them that you can rent to use, so you don't have to commit to buying the whole machine. So if you just type in AlphaStim rent, you'll find them. Right, so now here is what I do if I'm going to use IEMT for dream work. And I've got to say, I tend to use this if I've got an issue myself with bad dream stuff going on, less frequently these days. It is a very easy thing to do with other people as well. The challenge here is getting the setup right. So there's a number of features about the dream that are going to be unpleasant. There's the imagery aspect. And if the person can recall the vivid imagery, just treat it the same way as a memory. Hold that imagery in your mind and move your eyes. It would really be that simple. And that may well take you off to some interesting places or some unpleasant places that connects to real world historical stuff for that individual. The other thing to think of is the emotional component within the dream. So some dreams are very, very abstract imagery. There's nothing concrete the person can actually describe, but there's a state. There's a particular sense of despair or horror that they are experiencing within that dream or nightmare. That is the thing that is actually so disturbing about it. I think when I was a child, most of my nightmares as a young child had that form. There was never, so what was the dream about? I couldn't possibly tell you, because it wasn't about anything. It was as if I was in a psychological, emotional zone that I couldn't get out of. That was what the nightmare was. It wasn't like, oh, there's monsters coming to get me. Children may end up saying it's monsters. They may give you some abstract label simply because they need to satisfy the questioner, what's the nightmare about, or what was happening in the nightmare, because it's too difficult to explain if you're like 6 years old. Too difficult to explain. Well, I'm stuck and locked in this emotional state that I can't snap out of. In which case, we can take that as state. So how strong is this state out of 10? How familiar, and when's the first time you can remember? So that's the state that happens within the dream, which may, of course, be more than one. So if I'm in a dream, for example, where I am both getting angry at something, getting into a situation with something, and then I fall and I have that horror anxiety. Okay, deal with the anger and the falling horror anxiety. So deal with multiple facets. Which one do you do first? I'm not sure it matters. Personally, I'd go in reverse order. Do the anxiety one first and then go back from there. What else we got with this? There's the other one is the how the dream leaves the person feeling in the day after the dreaming. So depressed people are depressed by the dreams, but also when we have nightmares, it can really ruin the rest of your day, or a strange dream can ruin the rest of your day. Quite often there's going to be two components to that uneasy feeling that's left in the daytime. There's the emotional component, and there's the physiological component. So sometimes the person might feel a bit foggy-headed, a bit sort of irritable, a buzzing going on in their head or something else. Regard that as your three-stage abreactional process going on, and also regard that as a state itself. So how strong is it? How familiar? When's the first time? So what we're relying on here is a kinesthetic transderivational search. So for my, say, emotional dream, what I would have to do is connect to it. Now, I connect those things through my chest. It's not a cerebral thing, so I'd have to use whatever metaphor, heart chakra or whatever, to feel back into that state in order to answer how strong is out of 10. Because the dream state happens in a different form of consciousness to your everyday state, often the person might simply go, "Oh, I don't know." Or what I don't know, it was just a nightmare, wasn't it? Well, it's just horrible. I just get these bad dreams, and I just want you to do something about the nightmares. And they've got a disconnect because the dream and that stuff is happening in a different version of themselves than the version of themselves that's there with you now. In which case, you've got some work to do. Hypnosis can be a very effective way to get the person to connect to it. You may need to teach them to go into the alpha state first and then connect to it through alpha state. You might need to find out how they access physiologically into that. For those that have done the metaphors level 3 work, that would be a technique you can use there. How does the person enter into and exit from state? Because we're so good at separating responsibility of nighttime thinking from daytime thinking, and we culturally don't accept responsibility for what and how we dream, which I find extraordinary. So something I like to do with people is say, well, you're the one thinking those thoughts at night, so take some responsibility and let's just see what comes back, because they might go into a complete stock refusal to do so. How dare you speak to me like that? I'm not responsible for my dreams. Okay, 3-stage abreactions, which you say, that's right, you're not. And then take it from there to see what comes next. So sometimes the refusal or the disconnect itself is a defense against the real issue in their life. And so by breaking that down, that can then give you an access point into the stuff that you're doing. it's fairly advanced stuff. I'm going to recommend what you do is use this on your own dreams and nightmares. So if you've not had a dream or nightmare for a long, long time, possibly since childhood, but you can remember one from your childhood, right, start there. Use that one, because that's got a large time of disconnect between now and then. So access into that state. Find, how do you get into it? Revive the dream, revive the state, actually relive it. I can remember being a small child. I can remember being a baby. It's not like I can see a dissociated representation. I can remember childhood. I can remember both being it and put myself into the mindset of being a small child, which may not come as a surprise to some of you. But by being able to associate into different states of self and different states of experience, it gives me a very easy access into things, and I'm sure it's how I've been able to develop the levels of empathy I have to understand other people's stuff as well. I'm going to recommend that you practice this with your own personal history. Explore these different states and experiences that you've had in the past. Find out how they work, but most importantly, how do you connect into them, and then basically get inside it so you're now being that thing again. And then from inside that state, you can then do the IEMT techniques and processes. Don't forget as well to look at the identity components. So who is the person when they are being chased, or when they're having a nightmare? What are they? Is there an abstract thing? Do we have an anthropomorphic being chasing them? So it's a monster chasing me. It's an energy. It's a thing. What is that? What is the negativity that they're experiencing within that? Is it anthropomorphized? In which case, take that as an identity. How old is it? What's happening around it? And so on. And then you can explore that as well using the eye movement process. Because for me to be stabbed by somebody in the dream, I'm both the person being stabbed, I'm also generating the person to do the stabbing, and I'm the context of the dreamer on the outside of the whole thing. And yet I only experience it from an individual thing within that piece. So it's worth looking at the anthropomorphication of the other entities within the dream, the other components. And by doing the identity process, you're going to integrate the person with that. I'm not the sort of person who is violent at all. I don't wish harm on anybody, but I keep having this nightmare of my mother getting run over by a car. That was said to me by a schizophrenic, and I suggested to the mother that she is a little bit careful, because okay, her child is a darling, he's a lovely guy, very passive. He's not got a bad bone in his body, yet he's able to engineer thoughts and a story where he's not responsible for the death of his mother. And that's how I heard that. He's killing his mother in his dreams. He just has to have his brain asleep for him to be able to think it. Because when he's awake, he can inhibit that thought, he can inhibit it. Sometimes you have to be asleep for your brain to reveal the truth. And so the monsters and the scary stuff and those nightmares and that torture, those things happening in those dreams, that's you. It's just that you're able to deny it in the daytime. So we're going to start breaking down the boundaries between my ideal self and then the dark shadow side of self that I live in denial of. And let's get those two things integrated. So now it's not going to come back and persecute you every night. I think that's all I've got for this one. Comment section below, I'm going to put some interesting links for additional stuff to look at. I'm going to recommend you really pay attention to the different types of brainwave activity, the sleep cycles, the circadian rhythms, the ultradian rhythms. There's the work by... I can't remember the guy's name now. What's the guy's name? There's the work by ROSSI around the ultradian and circadian healing cycles. That's well worth looking at too. His book is very detailed around the different neurotransmitters and the functions they have with regards to learning. So I'll put links to these things in the page below. Comment section is open, so do please add any comments, questions, additional pieces, any useful little tidbits. Things like, why do we sleep? Well, it's because the synapses lose all the crappy proteins we don't need anymore. Stuff like that. If you've got any detail around those kind of things that I only ever see on Facebook as headlines and don't really look at, stick them in the comment section.